My name is Sarah, and for 14 years I was the luckiest woman alive. I was married to Adam. He wasn't just my husband, he was my best friend, my rock, the man who took a broken single mother and a 2-year-old little girl and turned us into a family. He didn't have to love Lily. He didn't have to adopt her when she was 5, giving her his name and his heart, but he did. He built his life around us. And then on a Tuesday, in the blink of an eye, at a random intersection, a stranger ran a red light and my world ended. Adam was gone. He was 38 years old. The collision was a T-bone impact, the kind you see in safety videos, the kind that crumples metal like paper. He died on impact, they said. A small mercy, perhaps, that he didn't suffer, but that mercy felt hollow when I stood over his casket 3 days later. The funeral was a blur of black suits, hushed whispers, and the suffocating smell of lilies. It was small, just family. On one side of the grave stood Gerald and Margaret, Adam's parents. They were rigid people, the kind who believed emotion was a sign of weakness unless it was directed toward their own pride. On the other side stood Lily and me. Lily was 12, standing there with tears streaming down her face, clutching my hand so hard her knuckles were white. She called him Dad. He was her dad in every way that mattered. But as I looked across the fresh earth, I saw something in Gerald's eyes that frightened me more than the grief. I saw calculation. I saw a man looking at a vacancy and already planning how to fill it with his own designs. I didn't know it then, standing in the rain, but the war for Adam's legacy had already begun, and I was the only thing standing in their way. If you've ever been in a position where the people who are supposed to comfort you instead treat you like an obstacle, then you know the kind of isolation I felt that day. If you believe that family should lift you up, not tear you down, hit that like button and subscribe, because this is a story about what happens when you underestimate a mother with nothing left to lose. The reception was held at our house, a modest 3-bedroom suburban home that Adam had poured his soul into. He'd paid it off himself, a testament to his hard work. He built a small tech company from the ground up, starting in our garage and moving to a small office park. He had 10 employees, contracts with 3 major clients, and revenue hovering around $2 million a year. It wasn't a Fortune 500 company, but it was his empire. It was the result of sleepless nights and endless sacrifice. As people milled around, picking at sandwiches and speaking in hushed tones about what a tragedy it was, Gerald pulled me aside. He didn't ask how I was holding on. He didn't ask about Lily. He asked about the money. "We need to discuss Adam's estate," Gerald said, his voice low, devoid of the tremble one might expect from a father burying his son. He stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the room like he was appraising furniture. I blinked, still in a fog. "Now?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Adam's funeral was an hour ago." "It's important," he insisted. "Business doesn't stop for grief, Sarah." Margaret drifted over, hovering at his shoulder like a vulture waiting for the lion to finish. She didn't sit. She didn't offer a tissue. She just stared at me with those sharp, judgmental eyes. "Adam left everything to you," Gerald stated. He said it like it was an accusation, like I had stolen something from them. "Yes," I said, confusion warring with the indignation rising in my throat. "That's what married couples do. We leave everything to each other. He wanted to make sure Lily and I were taken care of." Margaret let out a soft, derisive sigh. "We think there should have been provisions for us." "Provisions," I repeated, the word tasting sour. "Provisions for what?" "For the family business," Gerald cut in, his voice hardening. "Adam built that company with our money, our investment. It should stay in the family name. It's his legacy." "I am family," I said, my voice trembling not with fear but with rage. "I am his wife. Lily is his daughter." "You're not blood," Margaret said. The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. She didn't blink. She just delivered the verdict. "You were his wife, for now. But you'll move on, Sarah. You're young. You'll remarry. And then that company, our son's life work, will end up with some stranger. It won't belong to the family anymore." I stared at her, feeling the blood drain from my face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband wasn't even cold in the ground, and they were already trying to dismantle my life. "That is not your concern," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Adam trusted me. He wanted me to have this." Actually, Gerald said, stepping closer, invading my personal space, it is our concern. We want to buy the company from you, and the house. We'll give you a fair price. You can take the money and start over somewhere else. It's what's best for everyone. I'm not selling, I said. The audacity of it was breathtaking. They wanted to buy the house I lived in, the house I shared with my husband, the house where Lily grew up, for a fair price, which I knew would be a fraction of its worth. Think about it, Gerald warned. You don't know how to run a company. You're a secretary, Sarah. You don't know the first thing about contracts or payroll or clients. You'll drive it into the ground within 6 months. Better to sell now while it's worth something. No, I repeated louder this time. They didn't push. Not then. They just looked at me with this strange mix of pity and contempt. They saw a grieving widow who was in over her head. They saw an easy mark. I could see it in their faces. This wasn't over. It was just the opening gambit. The next 2 weeks were a haze of grief and administrative nightmares. I tried to keep the company running, calling Adam's business partner, reassuring clients, trying to learn the ropes of a business I had only ever watched from the sidelines. I was drowning, but I was keeping my head above water, until the headaches started. Lily had a history of migraines, but these were different. They were visceral, terrifying. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, clutching her head, vomiting violently. I took her to the hospital, my heart hammering against my ribs with every siren wail. The doctors ran tests. CT scans, MRIs. The diagnosis hit me like a second freight train, a brain tumor. It was benign technically, but it was growing rapidly, pressing on her optic nerve and her brain stem. The doctors had been monitoring it for a year, a small shadow on the scans, but something had changed. The pressure was building. She needed surgery. The neurosurgeon, a man with kind eyes and a weary face, sat me down in a cold consultation room. He explained the procedure. It was high risk. Best case, they remove it completely. Worst case, permanent brain damage or death. And the cost. The number hung in the air, written on the estimate paper. $350,000. Insurance would cover a portion, but our out-of-pocket deductible and copay for such a specialized surgery was $80,000. I didn't have $80,000. Adam's company made money, but it was all tied up in operating expenses, payroll, and hardware costs. I couldn't just pull $80,000 out of the business account without missing payroll and ruining the company's credit. The house was paid off, yes, but selling a house takes months, and Lily needed the surgery next week. I called banks. I applied for loans. I begged. I pleaded. I explained my situation. I was denied. My credit score was average, tied to Adam's income, which had just vanished. Without his signature, without his income stream, I was a liability to them. I was desperate. I felt the walls closing in. I was going to lose my daughter because I couldn't come up with the money to save her life. With shaking hands, I dialed Gerald's number. It was the last thing I wanted to do, but I had no other options. I swallowed my pride, swallowed the anger from the funeral, and asked for help. I needed $80,000. Gerald was quiet on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "That's a lot of money, Sarah," he said finally. "I know," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "But she's dying. The tumor is growing. If we don't do the surgery, she'll die. Please, I'll pay you back. I'll figure it out." "What are you offering in return?" he asked. His voice was calm, transactional. I froze. Offering. "You want us to give you $80,000. What do we get? You said yourself you can't pay us back right now." "I'll pay you back," I insisted, gripping the phone until my fingers hurt. "I'll work it off. I'll sell the house eventually, I promise." "Not good enough," Gerald said. "If you want the money, you need to give us something concrete, something of value." "Like what?" "The house and the company," he said. He didn't even hesitate. He had been waiting for this. "Sign them over to us. We'll pay for the surgery." The room spun. I felt my chest tighten, a physical pain that radiated through my ribs. "You want me to give you everything? Adam left me his life's work, our home, in exchange for $80,000. That's worth millions." "It's a fair trade," Gerald said. "You get the money for Lily's surgery. We get the assets. You say you can't sell the house fast enough. We solve that problem. You say the company money is tied up. We take that burden off your hands. You walk away with nothing, but your daughter lives. Everyone wins. That's not fair, I sobbed. That's extortion. That's the offer, Gerald said. Take it or leave it. I hung up the phone. I spent the next 2 days in a personal hell. I called credit unions. I called predatory loan sharks. I called friends. Nothing. Lily's surgery was scheduled for Thursday. It was Monday. I stood in the doorway of her room, watching her sleep, her face pale, her breathing shallow. She was fatting. I had a choice, my pride, my assets, Adam's legacy, or her life. It wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. I called Gerald back. I'll do it. Smart choice, he said. I could hear the smirk in his voice. We met at a conference room downtown. It was sterile, smelling of lemon polish and cold ambition. Gerald and Margaret sat on one side of the polished mahogany table. I sat on the other, alone. They slid a stack of documents across to me. Transfer of property, transfer of business ownership. They had come prepared. They had been planning this since the funeral, maybe even before. The lawyer, a man who looked like he charged by the minute and didn't care about the morality of the transaction, pointed to the lines. Sign here, and here, and here. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely grip it. With every signature, I felt a piece of my soul being torn away. I was signing away the house Adam and I had painted together. I was signing away the company he had built from nothing. I was handing his parents exactly what they wanted, vindicating their belief that I was just a placeholder until the real heirs could step in. We'll wire the money tomorrow, Gerald said, gathering the papers. He looked satisfied, triumphant. Surgery is in 2 days, I said, my voice hollow. We'll wire it tomorrow, he repeated. Not a promise, a command. The money came through the next morning, $80,000. I paid the hospital immediately. I sat in the waiting room on Thursday morning, staring at the clock. I waited for 6 hours, the longest 6 hours of my life. I replayed the conversation with Gerald in my head. I thought about Adam. I thought about the unfairness of it all. Finally, the surgeon came out, pulling down his mask. He looked tired but smiled. We got it, he said. All of it. Clean margins, no damage to surrounding tissue. She's going to be okay. I collapsed into a chair, sobbing. It was relief, gratitude, and an overwhelming, crushing exhaustion. Lily recovered over the next 2 weeks. She came home to a house that was no longer ours. She started feeling better. The headaches vanished. Her energy returned. I watched her heal, and I felt the weight of what I had given up pressing down on me. I had saved her life, but I had lost her future. I had lost Adam's legacy. I had nothing but the clothes on our backs, and the realization that his parents were monsters. But then, about a month later, as I was packing boxes to move us into a small apartment, I remembered something. It was a detail I had seen in the company's financial records months prior, back when I was trying to figure out how to run the business. I remembered a specific ledger entry. Adam had been meticulous with his books. He had loaned the company money, $750,900, from our joint personal savings. It was back when he was expanding the office and didn't want to take a high-interest bank loan. He just moved money from our savings to the business account. It was documented in the books, recorded as a liability. The company owed us that money. When Gerald and Margaret took over the company, they assumed all assets and all liabilities. That included the debt to me. The debt wasn't to Adam's estate anymore. It was a debt owed to me personally, from my joint account. And they had just bought the company without checking the liabilities closely enough, assuming the fair trade covered everything. They were so focused on the assets, they forgot about the debt. I stopped packing. My heart started to race. I pulled out the old records from the box I had kept hidden. I verified the documentation. I found the promissory note Adam had written up, legally binding, notarized. I sat there, staring at the number. $750,900. I called a lawyer, a different one, a shark. I sat in his office and laid out the papers. I have a debt owed to me by a company, I said. Can I demand repayment if it's legally documented? The lawyer looked at the papers, his eyebrows raising. Yes, what's the amount? $750,900. He whistled low. That's substantial. Do they have the assets to pay? They just took over a company worth about $2 million in revenue and assets, I said. And they own my house, which is paid off and worth $400,000. They have the assets. The lawyer smiled, a predatory glint in his eye. Then yes, you can demand repayment, and if they can't pay cash, you can force a settlement. You can force liquidation. I filed the demand. I have never felt a thrill quite like the moment I sent that certified letter to Gerald's new office, my husband's office. 2 days later, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then the text started. Then another call. Finally, I answered. "What the hell is this?" Gerald shouted. He was furious. "It's a debt repayment demand," I said calmly. I was standing in my kitchen, looking at the boxes I hadn't finished packing. "The company owes me $750,900. I'm calling it in." "You can't do that," he yelled. "We own the company now." "Actually, I can," I said. "It's documented, legally binding. You assumed the liability when you took over the company. You bought the debt, Gerald. Now you have to pay it." "We don't have that kind of cash," he sputtered. "We just paid for your daughter's surgery. We're reinvesting in the business." "Then liquidate assets," I said, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. "Sell the company, sell the house, I don't care. I want my money. You told me business is business, Gerald. This is business." "This is extortion," he screamed. "No," I said, smiling into the phone. "This is justice. You wanted the company, you got it along with everything that came with it. The assets and the liabilities pay up." Gerald tried to fight. He hired lawyers. He dragged it out, but the debt was clear. It was documented. The promissory note was ironclad. It was a legitimate business loan. They had no defense. They couldn't claim I had signed it away in the settlement because the settlement documents specifically listed the assets being transferred. They hadn't listed the personal debt liability because they hadn't known about it. They had been sloppy, blinded by greed. For 3 months, it went back and forth. Legal filings, depositions. I watched the stress eat away at them through the reports of my lawyer. They were panicking. They realized they were trapped. They had a debt they couldn't service without selling the very things they had stolen from me. Finally, facing the prospect of a court-ordered liquidation where they would lose everything and still owe me money, they agreed to a settlement. I sat in the same conference room where I had signed my life away months earlier. Gerald and Margaret sat on the other side. They looked older, tired, defeated. Margaret wouldn't look me in the eye. The terms were read out loud. They would transfer the house back to me, free and clear. They would transfer 40% of the company back to me, and they would pay me $200,000 in cash from their personal savings, effectively reimbursing the surgery cost and then some. I looked at Gerald. "Do you agree to these terms?" He glared at me, his jaw tight. "Yes." I signed the papers. I walked out of that building with the keys to my house in my pocket and the majority stake in my husband's company back in my name. I was the majority shareholder. Gerald and Margaret retained minority shares, but they had no control, no decision-making power. They were silent partners, forced to watch me run the company they had tried to steal. They would only get dividends if I made a profit that I controlled. Lily is 14 now. She's healthy, thriving. She runs track, she laughs. She has no more headaches, no more shadows on her brain scans. She doesn't know the full, gritty details of what happened. She just knows that Grandpa and Grandma tried to take advantage of us when we were sad, and that I got everything back. She knows we are safe. Gerald and Margaret don't speak to me. I haven't seen them in over a year. They tried once, a pathetic attempt to claim grandparents' rights to see Lily. I had my lawyer send them a stern reminder. Adam had adopted Lily. He was her legal father, but his death severed their legal connection to her. They have no rights, no claim, no leverage. They are strangers to her now. 6 months ago, they couldn't stand the indignity of being minority partners in my success any longer. They sold their minority shares to an outside investor, desperate to wash their hands of me. I approved the sale. I took the cash they injected into the company and I used it to expand. I hired more people. I grew the business. Adam's legacy is alive. It's thriving, not because of them, but despite them. Last month, Margaret sent a letter. It was a long, rambling mess of an apology. She wrote about family, about forgiveness, about how they only wanted what was best for the family name, how they missed Lily, how they hoped we could move past this. I didn't respond. I threw the letter in the trash. There is nothing to move past. They showed me who they were when I was at my lowest. They tried to exploit my desperation. They tried to take everything I had left of Adam. They would have succeeded if I hadn't remembered that ledger, if I hadn't been smart enough to use their own greed against them. Lily asked me once, "Why don't we see Grandpa and Grandma anymore?" I looked at her, this beautiful, vibrant girl who was alive because I fought for her, and I said, "Because they made a choice, sweetie. They chose money over family. And when you do that, you lose both." "Did we lose money?" she asked. "No," I said, thinking of the company, the house, and the settlement fund growing in the bank. "We got it back, all of it." "Good," she said, and went back to her homework. "So tell me, did I do the right thing? Was it too harsh to use a legal technicality to destroy them after they tried to extort me? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story of sweet, sweet justice, make sure to subscribe. I have plenty more stories where the bad guys lose and the underdogs come out on top. I'll see you in the next one.